Hello and welcome to PolyInnovator. This is a manifesto of sorts. I wanted to go into the details of why I created PolyInnovator, what are some of my goals, what are the methods that I'm going about to get towards those goals, and how did all of this really get started. Prologue. Now, for the most part, the real reason is because of the changes I want to help create in the world. I want to leave an impact or make a change. I've been using the hashtag make a change for almost a decade now, and that's because of this mindset I've tried to employ with this. Now, in this particular PolyCast, I'm going to get a little bit personal, which means I'm going to talk about myself a lot, and I hope that this doesn't seem egotistical or something like that, but in this case, it's probably going to be the most egotistical thing I've created, because I want to be able to convey this and put it out there in the world without having to worry that I haven't put it out there. I haven't shared my hopes and dreams, and so just in case if anything ever happens to me, someone could take up the mantle or something like that. It all started when I was a child, where I wanted to ask my family on my 8th or 9th birthday for office supplies because I wanted to be quote-unquote a businessman. And then as I got older, I wanted to become a CEO, so my ambitions grew, and I realized that the reason why I wanted to do that is because I wanted to have the power to make a change in the world, to make an impact. And I realized that social entrepreneurship kind of coming to fruition. And so as I got to be more of a teenager, I would say CEO of an international company driven to innovate technology and ideology. These particular principles of ideology or philosophy in a way, in the arts essentially, and the technology, meaning more like innovation, science, astronomy was one of the biggest things I was really interested in growing up, and just these technological areas basically. And those two dichotomies of the arts and sciences or technologies basically, where I wanted to convey the balance between them, and a lot of the best innovations in the world have come from the balance between all of those. So I wanted to start pursuing that as my career. I understood that finding a way to be a catalyst for change through the combination of science and philosophy. Chapter 1. The United Living Construct. I started my first blog back in 2011 on WordPress.com, just for the specificity's sake, and I realized that this particular platform was not open enough for me to really kind of create what I wanted to create, but it was my first foray into content creation and sharing my ideas. So ironically, I was actually more consistent back then, I think, than I am now at this point in 2020 that I'm recording this. And so what happened was I would start creating these content based around two ideas, well, three technically, but two main ones: world innovation and unity, and self-development. Those two key factors, world unity and self-development, kind of came into that trifecta of innovation, basically. And so I started creating more and more content. Those were the categories that I based it off of, and some of them would be all categories, some of them would just be one. So I had a real idea of where I wanted to talk about these different niches, so to speak. And I started going about it, but all the posts were very short. I didn't do any kind of sharing the knowledge on like social media and that kind of thing. I didn't know how to do all that yet. And as I got a bit older, I was going through high school, going through work, distracted by all other things in life, I kind of put the blog to the side. But once I started to move out and started to live on my own, I had the freedom again to start pursuing that particular goal again. I definitely kept it in the back of my mind most of those years. And I started the new blog on Wix and started really going to the whole idea of like, hey, this is a brand, this is what I want to talk to people about. And I created the United Living Construct as a brand, as a platform online. And so I started doing social media, I started doing podcasts, I tried going into videos, but I never actually got around to doing it. Had only I known that I could make a video like this, where there's a visualizer in the background. But it's interesting to note that that's what really got me into the whole skills of doing content creation. I learned how to do social media marketing and creation. I learned how to properly write blog posts and structure them. I learned how to do podcasts and learned how to use all the tools to do all that. Now, even though it wasn't successful, I do think that it taught me the right skills And I realized at one point that it wasn't going to go where I wanted it to go. I wasn't going to be able to create this hub of innovation, these people that I wanted to connect with, because I didn't have the authority or thought leadership as an individual to be able to lead this organization that I was trying to create. And it wasn't really that much of an organization because there wasn't enough people in it. Barely anybody who I knew in real life were looking at it, let alone any kind of people online. Chapter 2, PolyInnovator. And so one person told me about doing a personal brand, and I kind of just pushed the idea to the side. I was like, I want to focus on the main brand. This is the goal that I'm trying to work towards. I don't want to be distracted with something else. And so I didn't actually go about it for a while, and I kept pushing it back. I kind of started messing around with some logos and ideas, and ironically, it started out this concept of different United Living Construct people. So the way I saw the innovation cycle kind of going is that you needed people to be the leaders, you needed people who could unite, but that dissonance of leadership and unity weren't necessarily one and the same. You needed more of like a politician being someone who's like a leader, but then someone who, like Martin Luther King, was more of a uniter, bringing people together. And then finally, the last tier would be creators, someone to create things and overall produce the content that people see, or books and whatever kind of formats that you were thinking of. And then finally, there was actually a fourth circle of people called the Polyocians. So poly, ULCIANS. Polyocians being these polymaths of basically of the United Living Construct. And that kind of concept is what I wanted to be. That's who I envisioned myself as, this polymath. But I wanted to see it more as like a modern polymath. I knew people weren't going to adopt the actual polymath concept at that time. And so that became my username, that became my personal brand of sorts, but it wasn't going to grow, and no one could, I can barely even say the word, let alone someone else. And no one knew what a polymath was, let alone a polyocian. And so whenever I started going around to the actual personal brand, I took the skills that I learned with the United Living Construct to actually create something new and create this personal brand that I could build up my own knowledge, because I knew that I wasn't good enough to be that person in the United Living Construct. I wasn't at the level that I saw myself needing to be. And that's very important. That self-awareness that I wasn't good enough was super important, super enlightening in a way, and it taught me that I needed to learn more. In fact, a lot more, because if I wanted to become the person that I could create this, I would have to have multiple areas of skills and mastery almost in a way of those skills. So I started learning more and more, started learning more about social media marketing, so it definitely evolved at that point. I started learning how to do podcasts, I started learning how to do videos, and even though the confidence wasn't there, and I probably should have pushed myself a little bit harder to do it sooner, but I started doing podcasts, PolyCast as I call them, and I started doing videos, just not really uploading them as much yet. And then I finally got around the tech problems to actually start doing videos, because that was part of the hindrance as well. It was a good learning challenge. And I created PolyInnovator after the idea of being a polymath of innovation. So the whole idea behind the United Living Construct was to be a hub of innovation. So a PolyInnovator is a way to be the person in that hub or construct. Chapter 3, the modular degree. So, as I said in the last chapter, I wanted to become someone better than who I was before. Obviously, in that case, education comes into play. You have to learn in order to become better. You also have to learn how to actually use that knowledge as well. So application of knowledge is really important. So I spent a lot of time actually learning how to learn. And kind of going back in time a little bit, back to where, a little bit closer to the United Living Construct times, when I was making the second version of the ULC, I started working on the Wix website. And I realized that, like, man, there's a lot of habits I want to do. I want to be able to exercise frequently, because I was very adamant about learning a lot of that at that time. I know a lot now for it, but at that point I was still learning a lot about, hey, these are exercises I should do, as well as meditation, reading. I wanted to get into audiobooks at some point, never even touched them at that age. And online courses was still kind of blossoming in that range. They only been around for a few years. Obviously, OpenCourseWare had been around longer, but MOOCs and online lectures, courses were very new. So fine, and not to mention Duolingo too is a big habit of mine. So finding a way to do all these different habits, creating systems, which I didn't even know about systems at that point, and fine-tuning every aspect of my life to allow myself to become that person. And over these years, I've learned to do it. And I'm very grateful for the experience, and I hope that I can teach others to do so as well. But that self-development is what really, I think, drove me forward. After I finished high school, I realized that I just was not into the idea of college. I couldn't decide on a particular degree, let alone get into actual school, because my grades were abysmal in high school. Don't get me started on my GPA. Now, when it comes down to the actual development, I think I did a pretty good job for someone at that age. I really focused on learning, trying to apply that knowledge, trying to apply the actual skills in a real life setting, such as talking to people and learning body language and micro expressions. And I went out to places to actually try those out and learn how to communicate with people in a much more effective manner. Especially considering that I grew up being a gregarious extra talker. So I would talk just way too much, be a chatterbox, and not be able to communicate and be concise. Point being, I learned how to learn, and that led into the actual collection of courses, which I ended up with over 400 courses that I wanted to take. It's an insane number. In fact, I almost was kind of boastful about it. It's like, oh, these are all the courses I want to do. But then I realized the logistics of that, being able to take, even if I finished an entire course in one day, every day, it would still take me over a year to do, which was fine. And I still was kind of in the short-term mindset where I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to give myself 4 years, like an actual degree, to do this. And I really didn't go about doing that. What I did was I started trimming back, I started cutting up the fat and seeing what kind of stuff that I needed to actually learn and keep and use, stuff that I could actually use for the goals that I wanted to take. And I've done that a few times now, and I have less than like 150, I think, at this point. Still a lot more than most people would try to achieve, but definitely manageable. And considering I learned how to learn, I taught myself speed reading and being able to listen to audio and video at a higher speed, which really helps. Makes a 30-hour course now like less than 15 hours, which is fantastic. Not to mention to audiobooks and all these different other resources. So I culminated this list of courses and on the side, books and audiobooks, that kind of thing. I didn't actually put those into the main list, and I still probably should work on integrating all those different areas. This led me into what I called at the time the DIY degree. I didn't know that there was someone else actually who had already claimed that title in a way, which anyone could. It's not a particular brand. It's just one of those things where I wanted to separate myself from the previous iteration of that. Not to mention too, it wasn't just about doing it yourself. You really need mentors and peers and a community behind it. So doing it yourself wasn't the real goal. The real goal was to change the way people approached online education and really just education as a whole in the modern era. That came into the idea of modularity. I wanted people to choose what they had. That was a real lesson I learned when I had all those courses. Like, I realized I don't need all these courses. I don't want all these courses. And so I was able to make the modular aspect. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier is that I had organized them into semesters. So I started calling semesters. I started trimming them down, moving some around, changing the actual consistency of it. And this modular degree endeavor ended up becoming the catalyst to what made PolyInnovator grow and get started. Chapter 4: Adaptable Phases. So this adaptable phase mentality that I kept with my content. PolyInnovator talks about being a polymath. Most people don't know what that is, let alone actually want to be one. They think that, oh, if you're a jack of all trades, you're a master of none. And people don't even seem to realize the dissonance between a generalist or jack of all trades and a polymath. The level of skill and mastery that you need to have in order to become one. Which is why I don't see myself one as yet. I'm polymathic, I have the traits of a polymath, but I'm not a polymath yet. And that is the point of the modular degree, PolyInnovator, and all of this that I'm creating today. I'm trying to share my journey of becoming one. Think if Leonardo da Vinci, when he started out, he started writing a book, or at least that's all he could have at the time, but what if he started doing this, where he made modules of his voice and telling his journey throughout his discoveries of physics and anatomy and science and artistic values, if he were to put his voice down, not just in his journals, but his actual voice and ideas, he'd be able to really inspire a lot of people. Now, I'm not any Da Vinci, but I do see myself possibly becoming the successor of Da Vinci, someone who could surpass him with the advent of modern technology. That is kind of the point here. I wanted to find a way to take my polymathic, I don't want to say heritage, but ideals, and translate that into an actionable and executable idea. So these phases that I talk about on PolyInnovator are the certain areas of interest that I want to explore. I've been a fitness instructor for almost a decade now. That is a major aspect of my life. I have a lot of knowledge that I can share with people, but it's not my first and foremost phase. It's actually probably going to be the next phase. The first one is self-education, working on that modular degree, helping create the framework for other people to follow suit in pioneering that new education revolution. Whenever someone reaches out to me about education and they find out about this modular degree, they think it's pretty radical or revolutionizing or just very interesting to think about. With the coronavirus pandemic of 2020, a lot of people started going back home. They started staying home for school and for work. They didn't know what to do with themselves. They didn't know how to actually employ their natural skills they have for learning, or what they learned in college, or what they learned in any other situation in life with this new digital era. Even though we've all, for the most part, been digital natives for the past 20 years or so, many people still don't know how to really approach the systems and learning in this new age. Chapter 5. OmniContent. The OmniContent takes after the idea of omnichannel marketing, which a lot of people see the idea of marketing as something bad, but that whole area of knowledge has led me into content creation. And so marketing is a term where people think, oh, he's just advertising or creating stuff for the sake of trying to sell something. But marketing can be much more than that. It can be a connection between you and someone else. All it is the transference of an idea. And whether that idea is of a product that you can buy or an idea of a piece of content that you can look at and listen to like this. All it is conveying that idea to someone else. And so an omnichannel marketing experience would be where if I have one idea and I want to reach as many people as possible, you want to go multi-channel, going everywhere and trying to be doing that sustainably. So through the ideas of content repurposing and overall modern execution of content creation, taking advantage of new tools that we can do it, I try to create this omni-channel experience for people. And so the OmniContent is my series based off of that name, omni-channel content. What I did with this was to find a way to not only strategize with the perfect execution out of all the knowledge I've learned for social media marketing, content creation, blog posts, videos, podcasts. All these different mediums are very important to each individual. Some people like to listen, some like to watch, some like to read, and they may not interact with the other pieces of content if that's not their particular learning medium. So I wanted to not only inspire other marketers and content creators through this idea that you can be omnichannel without having to lose your soul or lose all your time, but you also have to be smart about the strategies and the things you employ to actually get it across and done. I use various tools, and I don't go into them too much because they're probably going to change over the years, but something like Notion, where you can have a database and documents and Kanban board all into one system, was revolutionary for me, because I looked at all of the other project management tools, all the social media management tools, and even various document programs to find a way to organize all these ideas and plans into a systematic, executionable, or actionable, at least I guess at this point, manner. And so I was able to come up with the idea of, since I started out with blogging, that's what I'm going to start out with. Most people record a video and just transcribe it into a blog, but I find myself creating better from scratch with a blog. So I do the blog, I create that into a slideshow so that way people can actually kind of see it in a more visual stance without having to watch a video. And that's also more just for SEO purposes for the most part, but I think it's useful for people to have. And then on top of that, it's really useful to record over to make a nice video. So not only can someone hear me and see me speak and see what I'm trying to convey, but they can actually see the background with text and just the ideas in a more visual stance. So it really kind of combines a lot of visuals into one. And then finally, you can take the audio out of that, clip it here and there if you need to make it actually sound better online in your headphones, and then turn that into a podcast, or in my case, a PolyCast. And being able to reach all these different mediums, helping to reach more and more people, that was the real strategy behind it. And I don't mind sharing it because people have done it for a long time. And nothing that I'm doing is particularly special. I just try to create a special order of operations that will allow me to do it either by myself or with a team more effectively. And so the reason why I share this in this manifesto is that throughout all the projects and content that I create, this is trying to be my main series. I'm trying to create it as all the content I ever wanted to create in this series. And then I can create it into multiple platforms, so that way every single person that's going to hear about it will read it or listen to it in the manner that they want to. And so at this point, despite the fact that I'm polymathic in the content that I create and the platforms I choose from, I want this OmniContent to be my basis, be like the foundation or baseline of all the stuff I create. Chapter 6, the Polymath PolyCast. Through the evolution of my content creation, podcasts were one of the ways I could really kind of delve into it. When I decided to think about this manifesto, I didn't want to make a video. I'm making a visualizer out of it so people can actually listen to it with something to watch. But I thought the best way for me to express this is through speech. Writing a blog may be my main skill, but I didn't think I was going to be able to convey it in that manner. I thought that being able to translate the idea audibly and then just repurpose it into different platforms later would be the best way to convey all this knowledge and ideas effectively. The Polymath PolyCast, there's a lot of polys in there. A lot of people give me crap about it, but I'm very adamant about keeping those in. I really want people to realize that the podcast is based off of the idea of the iPod, and it's very singular, just talking about one particular niche. And I can never decide on just one particular niche. And it wasn't a laziness or not being able to just decide. It was more of the fact that I didn't want to talk about just one thing. Even if I made multiple podcasts, it wouldn't work. And so the PolyCast came to be because of poly meaning much or many, which is why polymath meaning someone who is a master or learner of multiple areas. That divergent mindset was very much inherently created at the start of the PolyCast. Now the Polymath PolyCast is the main iteration of that. It's evolved over the years, and I kept the United Living Construct podcast as part of the PolyCast because the concepts that we talked about in there were very similar to the same ideas of the PolyCast. And the PolyCast is more of a type of content, like saying podcast, rather than a series. The actual series are the OmniContent, the Polymath PolyCast, Fireside Micro PolyCast, and probably some various others that'll come up along the line. Especially considering the fact that these different polycasts have different varying links and really actionable reasons why they're there. The main polycast can be any link at once. It's just one of those things where, just like this manifesto, I'll create it when I feel like I need something to share. And then the micro polycast, the Fireside Micro Polycast, that is more for small rants. So if this was just some 3-minute rant for the manifesto, that's probably what it would have been. But considering that it takes a lot of depth and talking to really get this point across, it's definitely going to be a Polymath PolyCast because it's going to be much longer than that. And then the PolyCast interviews that I've been doing have gone under the name of the Polymath PolyCast because of the fact that I'm really talking to multi-potential people. People have these areas of interest or potentials of areas they can go into. And many of them are actually polymaths themselves or polymathic themselves. And so I really wanted to learn from these people, share my knowledge to them if they need it, and really bring a value to the audience, which is why I thought the PolyCast would be a very good way to go about it. That's why I give its own chapter even in this manifesto. It's not part of the OmniContent per se. The OmniContent will be posted to the PolyCast, but they're not one and the same. They're not interchangeable. They're both subsets of the whole PolyInnovator ecosystem. Chapter 7. The PolyInnovator ecosystem. Something I alluded to in the last chapter was this ecosystem of content. And I say content, but I mean much more than that. The whole purpose of the PolyInnovator personal brand was to build a foundation for the career of my life, which sounds selfish, but that's what an online reputation is supposed to be, a personal brand, something that people can know you by. And since I wanted to be known for many different areas, I needed something to be a central hub of sorts. So PolyInnovator came about because of the impact I wanted to leave in innovation, education, the world in general, and the overall main goal of my life. That being, I want to help guide the world to becoming a Type 1 civilization on the Kardashev scale. Something I don't have too much time to go over today, but in overall essence, being able to lead the world in a new age of humanity's process. Now, I'm definitely not going to do that alone. I'm not some egotistical maniac who thinks he can just save the world or some crap like that, but I wanted to help spur the way of changes, being a catalyst for change. That's the real aspect. Regardless if I accomplish that goal, anything I do along the way will make a difference, I think. And so this PolyInnovator ecosystem is the culmination of all the efforts that I want to go forth throughout my life. I know I'm not going to be able to do all of them at once, and most people change careers or pivot careers throughout the decades of their life anyways. I'm just trying to plan it out ahead of time. So for example, the phases of the PolyInnovator content are not in sync, but alongside the ideas that I want to convey. For example, I've been a fitness instructor most of my life. A lot of that's come down to swim instruction, where I've taught swimming to people of all ages from all over the world coming to where I live here. And this idea of swimming that I've cultivated, the philosophy and hydrodynamics of how you actually move through the water, is something that I've cultivated in the idea. I've gestated that ideology, and I want to be able to convey that to multiple people. I've taught hundreds of people how to swim, and yet I'm still like a fraction of the people in the place I live, let alone everywhere else. And so I wanted to share that knowledge with multiple people. I even have boastfully said that I could teach Michael Phelps something new. And I truly think that with the amount of effort I put forth towards that. So in the next phase, being around the idea of cross-interdisciplinary training for exercise, Polymath exercise as I'm calling it, of course, and this idea of swimming is going to go under that umbrella. So it's not necessarily out of the question for me to create something like that, but I wanted to build up through self-education first, because that was the project that really got me going. It's a project that I really think that is more prudent at this point, being able to help people learn on their own or through peers and whatnot through this modular degree framework. Now, I'm still developing the framework at the time of this recording, so I can't say that it's ready for people to use, but it's just an idea and an organizational structure for different taxonomies, and just trying to culminate all the ideas and resources like a resonance calendar for all the different areas of learning: audiobooks, books, or ebooks in this case, and courses, YouTube videos, whatever learning you want to do, keep track of it. Show that you learned it, show that you went into it. Make it more of like an accountability system and proof that you actually did it, so that people can actually say like, hey, this guy doesn't have a degree in marketing, but he's watched 10 courses on digital marketing that came out this year that were modern and applicable, and so it's much more effective at actually getting you the job done. So this ecosystem of sorts is culminating any kind of books I'll write in the future, any courses I create, any audiobooks that I'm creating. I might even turn this one into an audiobook considering the chapter format. And so all the OmniContent can work towards this, all of the PolyCast can. Everything that I create, I want to put under this giant umbrella. Down the line, I would like to work in music development, creating different kinds of music that are more unique and hybrids. I want to work in video game development. I've always been a very avid gamer, and I want to be able to share the stories that I've created. And all these different areas that, if I were to try to pursue on their own, would take either degree or amount of work that would be not actionable for someone who is divergent in interest, to say the least, or just kind of like a squirrel, like, hey, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. Chapter 8. Self-EduDevMent, and the culmination of the first phase. Whenever I talk about self-education, it really comes down to the modular degree framework. However, it doesn't just come down to education itself. Education is more of a foundation or a grounding for knowledge. What you do with that knowledge and how you develop it and improve it is very important as well. So this concept of self-EduDevment takes a trifecta of self-education, self-development, and self-improvement into a new manner or idea in a system, so to speak, that will allow people to organize their goals into more actionable steps and systems. So education being the foundation, improvement being the consistent chipping away and practice that 1% improvement every day, as well as development being the exponential factor, a catalyst for the growth in your life. I talk more about this in my self-education mini course, as well as just in the content I create. This leads into the first phase. Despite the fact I often say the first phase is self-education, it really is self-EduDevment. I want to be able to create content in all three areas as a basis for later phases down the line. And so I really wanted to talk about this just real quick, more of a shorter chapter, to just kind of dispel the idea that if you learn on your own, it's not good enough. As long as you are learning from a reputable source, like a Harvard X course or something like that, something that you know has merit, then you have the power to use that knowledge in some productive way. But if you're not knowing if that knowledge is useful, maybe it's a YouTube video that you don't trust, you need to use your self-development to gain the skill of critical thinking, gain the skill of analysis and self-awareness to know when you're learning something that's not important. And when you do that, you can take that skill of learning and apply it towards areas like innovation or your own potential career and really blossom from it. Chapter 9, 4 Pillars Philosophy. Now this is something that I came up with almost a decade ago when I was pursuing the United Living Construct's first development. And as much as I always say I came up with it, it's obviously just a culmination of many different philosophies around the world. Someone actually tried to talk to me about this recently, but there's a Spartan Delta, I guess you could say, which talks about the mind-body connection and spirituality on top of it. So they have a trifecta of sorts. And then there's always the 4 areas of yoga, there is Logos and Greek philosophy. There's a lot of aspects of many different philosophies that can be applied to the 4 pillars. But the way I go about it is try to make it a more modern approach to philosophy, and you can actually apply it in that sense. So the 4 pillars are the mind, body, spirit, and emotions, and each of these pillars highly impacts your life. They are the 4 major aspects of your life and existence. If one of the pillars is weakened or no longer able to progress farther, then you need to focus on something else as well. The balance between the pillars is really key. That is why it's a philosophy. It's not just the ideology of how we approach different areas of life. It's how they culminate. It's how they come together. Everyone knows the mind and body are very connected now. That's been something that's been talked about for decades now, and obviously centuries before then, but in the modern sense, decades. But the actual areas of your emotions and how it changes your physiology. So the 4 pillars is more about how your mind impacts your body, the neuromuscular connection, how your mind impacts your spirituality, the balance between your subconscious and conscious mind, or how your emotions are a primitive side of our brain that we can't always control, but we need to be aware of them happening. And so all these areas are greatly impacting your self-development and your overall life progression. And if you don't be aware of them, then we're going to end up failing at our lives in general. So that's where this part of the self-EduDevment concept comes into. This is the self-development portion. So whereas the modular degree is more for self-education, the 4 pillars philosophy is more towards the self-development. Now, for self-improvement, I honestly just take James Clear's Atomic Habits because it's a perfect fit for that. It's the consistency of the 1% progress every day. So between those 3 philosophies and ideologies and systems, you have a trifecta system that you can actually work on consistently. Chapter 10, PolyInnovator Gaming. This is obviously something that's more of just an interest to me, but I do think that I could be interesting for other people as well. Not only have I always been a very polymathic gamer, so I would play all the consoles and multiple different types of games. I'm not stuck to just one genre. I also have a very wide interest in how I pursue it. And so I want to be able to be a streamer at some point, to have all the profiles set up, as well as down the line, I would like to actually create my own games. Growing up, throughout this whole development of my business ideology, I've also been a gamer. So I started writing a video game saga ever since I was a child, and so I'm still want to cultivate that idea. One of my main hobbies that's actually separate from PolyInnovator is spriting, the creation of two-dimensional characters for video games. And so there's many different facets of gaming that I think would be very worthwhile to pursue down the line, and that's why I'm putting it in this manifesto, because it's something I'm interested in, and PolyInnovator is meant to be the foundation for all the phases of the interests. Chapter 11, Smart City Development. Now that we're getting more into the meat of things, smart cities are a concept where these cities are more futuristic. They have the smart light systems where the street lights actually have a timer, or they have solar panels, or they have connections to the internet so that people can actually know when people are around there, and where if like there's a giant traffic jam of people or cars, we can know that. And it's not about privacy really, it's more about how useful these inanimate objects can be, such as street lights. Where you're seeing these signals. Why are certain signals longer than others when the traffic there is very rapid? And so the overall concept of a smart city is trying to develop a city into a more connected ecosystem. And I said more on the Internet of Things areas where the devices are smart, but it also comes down to the culmination of urban development and how that impacts the wind flow through the city, and having the data and metrics to track how the wind or water or whatever natural element we're trying to work on flows. Singapore, for example, built their buildings in a special way to cultivate a certain air path. Now, when it comes to smart city development, we need people who are interdisciplinary and they can innovate these new areas that degrees that we have now aren't going to prepare them for. There is people who are specialists in one area but need to know another specialty in order to actually work in smart cities. And so this is one reason why the modular degree came about, so we can actually find people and give them an education for smart cities. That was one of my goals when I created my first DIY modular degree, is that I wanted a smart city degree. I couldn't find one, especially back when I was looking, so I created my own. Now, when it comes to how we actually operate a smart city, that's different. We have to make sure that we're either just innovating an old one or building one from scratch. We have to define that, define who's going to live there. Many factors are involved, but this is one of the areas of interest that I have been working towards, and one of the reasons why PolyInnovator exists. Before I continue on to the next chapter, one area of interest that I actually don't usually talk about very much, but now that I'm being honest in this manifesto, I'm going to mention it, is seasteading. So when I envisioned the United Living Construct, I actually started visualizing it as a seastead city. And so a hub of innovation on the ocean, being able to be a capital for the world or something like that, being able to lead innovation throughout the entire planet. Chapter 12, Hub of Innovation. So something I've mentioned in the last chapter as well as the first one, the United Living Construct. What is it? Well, in essence, it is a construct of ideas and innovative people coming together to pursue global unity and self-development. That is what I envisioned for it, and that is what inspired me to create the blog and content before. So if you listen to some of the old ULC Tech podcasts, that's what we're talking about. Now, when it comes to the United Living Construct in the future, there's two phases of it, if you will. There is the online community phase, where I'm bringing people together to help innovative projects come to life, and akin to like a startup accelerator or something like that, but not necessarily in the funding sense, but more of the creative sense. And down the line, what I had hoped to do is create it as a physical construct hub of innovation. As I alluded to in the last chapter, a seastead was something that I was envisioning much more, but even something on the ground would be fantastic. It's just a matter of, I want it to be unbordered, so multinational, globalization centric. It is all about the future of the global economy and humanity as a whole. Let's just put it that way. And so that having a country-centric approach would not work. It has to be multinational. And so being a seastead would give it more of the free reign to have a wide-ranging audience and grouping together. Not to mention too, I do want it to be a capital of sorts for the world, because there's no place in the world right now that could be a capital without being a conflict generator. If we had something on the sea or somewhere that is not planted on any particular soil, it would not be confined to any particular nation, allowing for a much more adaptable approach to a new future city. So this hub of innovation is the culmination of many ideas and people coming together to pursue global development as a whole and as a team. That is what I want. That is what I dream. That's what caused me to create the United Living Construct and PolyInnovator. Chapter 13, Global Keynote Speaker. Now, something I've always been very fascinated by is public speaking. One thing that I actually pursued was teaching myself how to sing, which gave me a chance to get past my stage fright. So I went to karaoke religiously for years to pursue that self-development endeavor for myself. And as well as some of my physical background, I taught water aerobics and water boot camp and these physical classes where you had to have this public speaking persona in a way to be a good teacher. And so I've had the history of being on stage and performing and talking to people and being able to create this content like I am right now too. But culminating all those together would actually create the speaker keynotes for any kind of concept that I wanted to employ. Now, many people say you need to niche down. Once again, it comes down to the polymathic tendencies that I employ. It is a natural inclination that I cannot fight, and this dream of becoming a speaker, I've been inspired by comedians and people like Gary Vee and just other keynote speakers who have been able to express such emotion and performance on stage. And there's so many ideas that I want to convey to the world, which is why I create content in the first place. So whether it's about smart cities, omnichannel marketing, personal development, polymath exercise, or even swimming, I want to be able to share those ideas to the world on stage. So a lot of the actions that I've taken in the past, such as creating content and just building my thought leadership in general, all of that is leading towards the keynote speaking. And I want to share those ideas with the world and be able to create the hub of innovation through those speaking endeavors as well. Chapter 14, PolyInnovator Construct. Now, I talked about the ecosystem of PolyInnovator in some of the earlier chapters. However, the PolyInnovator construct is an idea I've been toying with the past few years, I guess you could say. I was wondering whether or not I should continue the United Living Construct as a concept or brand, because all the ideas that I had employed for that have been coming into PolyInnovator. I even adopted the United Living Construct Tech podcast into the PolyInnovator PolyCast system, because it just seems to be one and the same to me. I know that in a visual sense they're different, green and red for example even, but the actual goals in mind were basically one and the same. The way I went about it changed, and I think that's just the evolution of the process. So the PolyInnovator construct still keeps that hub of innovation centric approach as well as the world unity through self-development idea. Although self-development evolved into Self-EduDevMent and world unity evolved into becoming a Type 1 civilization. So the PolyInnovator construct is meant to help guide the world into a world unification towards creating the Type 1 civilization on Earth, or Terra, whatever you want to call it. In this final chapter, I'm going to be going over the rest of all the chapters and showing how they're going to culminate into that construct. So, as I alluded to in the past minute or so, the United Living Construct is the basis, it's the foundation that I started with. And so that idea of the ULC, living united in a construct of sorts, whether it's online or in person, doesn't matter. It's coming together and uniting for a future of humanity. And then PolyInnovator came about that to be a polymath of innovation, someone who is the culmination of uniters, leaders, and creators, and able to lead the actual ULC, whether it's me or someone else, it doesn't matter, just someone who has the culmination of all three circles, uniters, leaders, and creators, and becoming a PolyInnovator from that. And so PolyInnovator is a concept that doesn't just apply to my personal brand or me, but anybody who wants to work in innovation and culminating them to a more generalist approach. The modular degree is a tool for people to develop themselves and educate themselves into whoever they want to create themselves to be. So it's a very manifestation-centric idea, but it's more practical and a framework and a system that people can use and actually use as an alternative to traditional college learning. The adaptable phases of PolyInnovator allow for the polymathic-centric approach to culminate into its natural fruition. So I'm not just going to focus on one thing. When a phase changes, it's going to still keep up some of the past phases, ideally at least. And so whenever there is the next phase, Polymath exercise, I'm still going to be talking about self-education. I'm still going to be talking about poly-innovator gaming whenever I'm working on the next thing after that. The next thing comes down to OmniContent. So all these phases come together into what I'm creating as a main series, the OmniContent series. OmniContent standing for omni-channel. So not only is it omni as in I'm talking about everything under the PolyInnovator ecosystem, but as well as on every platform. The Polymath PolyCast is the extension of the regular PolyCast that the OmniContent is on, where I talk more long form like this manifesto of sorts, or even interviews as well. This culminates into the PolyInnovator ecosystem, so whether it's the PolyCast, PolyInnovator Gaming, OmniContent, and whatever particular subset or series comes up in the future, that all culminates underneath the ecosystem under PolyInnovator. This ecosystem will build into self-development and smart city development, as well as global civilization development. Through this, I will create a hub of innovation, allowing for people to come together to innovate the world. And whether I'm a keynote speaker and a leader, or if I'm just a creator and someone else becomes the poly-innovator, whatever it may be, we will create together the poly-innovator construct to lead the world towards a Type 1 civilization. Epilogue. Before I wrap up today, I want to thank you for actually making it through this PolyCast manifesto for PolyInnovator. It is not something I felt that I really wanted to make, but something that I needed to make. Whether something happens to me, or if this is just proof that I had the ideas back in 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now. Whatever the reasoning behind this is, you stayed and listened to all of it, and I thank you for that. It is super important to me that I created this, and you stuck with me the whole time, and that means a lot. And so if you want to talk to me about it, or have any things that kind of sparked ideas from this, feel free to reach out to me. Come talk to me on social media, message me, email me, whatever it may be. And so you can email me at info@polyinnovator.space. Now, take this idea, run with it, find something that you can do to be your manifesto or your why.
Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator.